Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another Wednesday night extravaganza with myself, yours truly, Simon Jacobson. And I welcome all of you, newcomers as well as faces that have been here before. But as you all know, as I've many times emphasized here, a fundamental principle in Jewish mysticism is the idea of perpetual renewal, which means that even though on the surface level things sometimes seem static and immobile and don't change, but in truth beneath the surface, the forces, the energies, the subatomic particles are always alive and they never sleep and they're always changing. So though some of your faces may seem similar to the way you looked last week, despite the aging process, not to suggest anything, that was not meant in any way, it's only a week. So despite the fact that we may look similar to the way we looked a moment ago, the Torah says that we say it every morning in the prayer, HaChodesh b'tuvei b'chol yom tamid ma'aser bereshis, that existence is renewed every moment anew. And the will, that God, the divine will, that existence be existent, needs to be renewed all the time. Just like when you're speaking, you don't just speak automatically, you have to constantly will your words coming out of your mouth. So too the divine energy has to constantly be so-called transmitted into existence itself. Which essentially means that, as I said, even though on the surface level it may seem that things are just constant, on the inner level of our inner personalities and our souls, there's always change and always renewal. Which is also, I guess, a reason for hope, that even when things seem stuck and seem inertia seems to take over, there is always that inner force. And hopefully, when we have good friends, they are able to make us laugh, they're able to get you out of a bad mood. Just like music has the ability to touch a part of you that suddenly can awaken you, same as with friends. And hopefully this Wednesday night evening here can also do a little of that. That doesn't mean necessarily you have to be in the doldrums or somewhat depressed to be here, because as we say, even if you're in a good mood, there's always room to be better. So hopefully I can help achieve that somewhat. And that comes down to the theme of this evening, which is miracles. Miracles. Now, it's a word that is used often, and often like a cliche, what's a miracle? Leonard Cohen has this famous depressing song called Waiting for a Miracle. The person who's waited half his life away for a miracle. There are people waiting for miracles. In a sense, like just sitting and waiting for something to happen, a breakthrough. So in that sense, a miracle is almost a euphemism, a type of like a cynical expectation that's not really realistic. But we also have miracles in a biblical, religious sense. People believe in miracles. And the whole concept of a miracle I'd like to address. The reason I want to talk about it is because it's appropriate to the time in which we are now. And that is, we are now, this coming Shabbos, we are blessing the new month of Nisan. The beginning of the Hebrew calendar begins in this coming month. So even though we have Rosh Hashanah, that is 7 months ago, that's what's considered to be the beginning of the solar year. But the beginning of the way we count the lunar months begins when the Jews left Egypt. And therefore this month of Nisan, coming up month when we celebrate Passover, is considered to be HaChodesh HaRishon, the first month. And the name Nisan, which is the name of the month, actually means miracle. Nisan comes from the Hebrew word Nes. As the Talmud says, why is it called Nisan? Not Nun Yud Samach Nun. In Hebrew, Nes is Nun Samach. So the Talmud tells us, and the tractate Brachas, because Nisim Nasa Lahem. Miracles and upon miracles happen to them. So Nes would be one miracle. Nisan essentially is like the plural of miracles in the feminine. So like many miracles, Nisim. So this month, the name of the month that's coming now, is exemplified and captured in the word miracle. Of course, because of the miracles that happen in the month, namely the exodus from Egypt. So there's a holy book called Akedah, or sometimes known as Akedas Yitzchak. Yitzchak Arama was a Sephardic scholar in the Middle Ages, and he wrote a very profound philosophical interpretation, commentary on the Bible. Very, very deep. It's like essentially a profound philosophy and a philosophical take on biblical concepts. And he talks about these two cycles in the Jewish calendar: the cycle that begins in Rosh Hashanah and the cycle that begins in this 7th month in Nisan. In other words, it's like two cycles, and he describes that there's two ways that we can recognize divine force in our lives, in the world, in the universe. One is through nature. As he puts it, that nature is simply the precision and the clock-like precision and the consistency that you can depend on literally in an absolutely consistent way of nature demonstrates, as he puts it, some type of divine force that keeps it in place. Because what else would keep it so precise? Why wouldn't it be sometimes random? You can know exactly what second the sun will rise tomorrow morning, and when it will set, and when the moon will rise, and we can predict lunar eclipses. And these aren't miracles. This is because there's an unbelievable symmetry and mathematics behind existence that is profound and organized and beyond the scope and unfathomable type of precision. So he speaks about that cycle as the cycle of nature. That he compares to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, beginning of the year, is the beginning of that cycle. And then he talks about the cycle that is the beyond nature cycle, the miraculous cycle. That there are things that happen in our lives that are precisely the opposite. They're not consistent, they're not necessarily expected. The unexpected happens to you, what he calls the miraculous, something that is not according to the order, and that too is a sign of a divine expression, where you thought that you're stuck or you thought that there's no hope, and suddenly something is a breakthrough that we would call a miracle. And that is a different expression of the divine expressing the ability to transcend the system. So both the structure, which is such an eloquent and beautiful structure, in its consistency, in its symmetry, in its complementation, and so on, and also those experiences that we have that are so-called beyond the structure, both are two different reflections of divine experiences in our lives. That's how Yitzchak Aramah explains it, HaChodesh Yitzchak. But to go further and dissect what exactly a miracle means, a miracle, is, on one hand, one could argue that it's something that requires belief and faith, and either you have the faith or you don't have the faith. A scientist or a rationalist would argue that there's no proof and there's no need to rely on miracles. Everything in this universe can be predicted. Natural events. Maybe in the primitive times, or in the old times, in the times of old when they did not understand scientific phenomenon, they thought an earthquake or a volcano or a thunder or a lightning was some type of act of God. Whereas today we know it as being a simple symptom or a result of natural forces at work, clashing with each other, or the pressures under the Earth's crust, as far as earthquakes go, or the heat and the molten heat inside the center of the Earth's core, which is the root of volcanoes. So today we have a deeper understanding of nature. So the argument could be that we don't have to see a volcano as a miracle. It's not like God's wrath, which is the way many so-called modernists will dismiss the concept of miracles in biblical times. That this parting of the Red Sea simply may have been a tsunami, or may have been a result of a volcano, or some other fierce storm that appeared to the people as if the waters split. A tsunami does appear that the water can literally expose, the land is exposed right before the waves strike. I mean, there are different type of so-called rationalizations. So in that context, you could argue that miracles have no basis in science or in reasoning. Faith is another story. If a person has faith, of course, you can't dismiss that a person has faith. You can believe that miracles can happen and have happened and will continue to happen. However, in truth, if you really look into the mystical understanding of a miracle, you'll see it's quite actually a scientific concept, not one that is dependent purely on faith and belief. So though there's definitely an element of faith where, for instance, if God forbid somebody's sick in the hospital, or doctors gave up hope, and you believe that a miracle can happen, and doctors will say, we need a miracle, and then sometimes miracles do happen. Obviously, you may require belief there, because doctors will say, naturally, we don't know what we can do. We've done everything we can. Yet you find that people have overcome terrible illnesses, have, despite the predictions, the dire predictions of a doctor, and some humble doctors will tell you, yes, that there is absolutely the room for a miracle, or something that was completely not predictable by us. Or just as you find, just the other day I heard a great piece of news about a woman that was already 20 years ago, she's now 44, 20 years ago the doctors had said she will never have children. Basically, they went based on their tests and the diagnosis, she was unable to, for whatever reason, something physical inside of her that was unable to have children. And she just found out she's conceived and is pregnant. And so far so good with a healthy child. And the doctors clearly say it's a miracle. The doctor I happen to know the doctor, who happens to be a very humble, he's not Jewish doctor, his name is Dr. Griffo. He's the head of the fertility unit in NYU. A very, very fine doctor, very humble doctor, who is a real God-fearing person who will say that doctors, all they can do is maneuver the limited knowledge we have about medicine. But most of a human being's life, and especially in the internal organs, are mysterious. We don't really know how they completely work, especially fertility, anyone that neurological issues. I mean, the human being, as small as we may be, this 5-6 foot frame, we are a walking miracle. Doctors will say that, and any real scientist will say that if they don't have any agenda. So, in that context, you could say you need belief to believe that that's possible. But let me dissect how the mystics will explain a miracle. And it goes something like this. If, for instance, you look at physical phenomenon in this world, so you see, as I mentioned at the outset, that there's a surface. You look at this table, and whatever it's made of, let's just say it's made of wood, it's probably not made of wood. It's made of, as what's called authentic, they say authentic imitation leather. It's made of authentic imitation wood, some synthetic materials, but let's, for argument's sake, it's made out of wood. So, okay, so if someone says to you, a child asks you, so what is this table? You say it's a table. What is a table? A table is wood, chopped from a tree, then shaped and carved and blah blah, and then processed and turned into shape of a wood. You could also you could do benches, chairs, other objects with this wood. So for a child, a little intelligent will say, well, what is wood? Fine, the table is made out of wood, but what is wood made out of? So today we'll know that wood is made out of molecules. Wood is a particular combination of molecules on the atomic scale. That certain molecules in a certain combination consist of wood. Other molecules, H2O, is water, hydrogen, oxygen, and so on. In other words, the wood breaks down into further elements, and those elements, whether it's 105 elements or whatever the number is today, in my days in school it was something like that. What does it come down to today? I don't even know. I think it's something like 110 elements. And these elements, different configurations, define different objects. So basically, even though initially we would have said there's millions of different types of substances, scientists discovered on a molecular level it's 105, 110 elements. I may be wrong in the exact number, but that's not relevant to the discussion. And then the student asks further, so what are molecules made out of? We'll now say that molecules are made of atoms. A molecule itself, let's say hydrogen, has a particular atomic structure. And then what are atoms made of? Out of subatomic particles. We used to know an atom as an electron, a neutron, and a proton. Now there's also a bunch of other subatomic particles that are discovered and continue to be discovered. Particles that are so minute and so minuscule, so that they're not even visible on normal circumstances. You need to either have high speed, acceleration, or high levels of heat or cold to expose certain forces. And the search goes on. So you can say, if you're an honest person, you'll say to this child or to the student, listen, the wood, the tree, the table is made out of wood. Wood is made of molecules. The molecules, elements, atomic and subatomic particles. And that's as far as we've gotten. There may be many, many more layers no one really knows. We may never ever reach to the core of it all. But what we do know is that all these layers are absolutely real, and you don't need faith today to accept it. Even though we all accept it on faith. None of us have ever seen a subatomic particle, nor have you seen a molecule in most cases. So with a microscope you probably can see molecules. But subatomic particles, no human being on earth has ever seen it. Not only that, physicists will tell you that no one can ever see it. It's just simply no instrument that will ever be able to perceive that level. It's not a question of developing better instruments. There's a state of being that is so, whether it's a state of probability in quantum mechanics, that is simply non-observable. That still does not mean it doesn't exist. It just means we don't have the tools to interpolate. We can't directly perceive it, but indirectly we can. Indirectly through bouncing things off of it, through accelerating it, as I said, heating it up, seeing its effects. The whole modern technology that we benefit so from, cellular phones, or fax, or for that matter television, radio, computer, microchips, are all a result of the manipulation of those elements that are, those subatomic particles that are not visible, but clearly and very visible have direct impact on the life we live. The point I want to make of all of this is that the forces that shape existence are not necessarily visible, nor they're necessarily very empirically observable, but they're observable in many ways through their impact on our lives, through their symptoms, so to speak. So the mystics say that within all that energy lies one more layer, which is called spiritual energy. So just like there's a subatomic energy or quantum energy, there's spiritual energy. That really is the ultimate essence that gives shape to everything that exists. So just to use an example, just to make it a little more palatable, when a person cries, for example, and a tear comes out of your eye, so no intelligent person is going to say that first you have tears out of your eyes and then you feel sad. It's the other way around. You feel sad, and once that sadness, the emotion, which is a completely non-physical emotion, you can physically feel it, but I mean to say the emotion itself doesn't have any tangible dimension to it. For some reason, when it wells up in you, it can turn into tears in your tear ducts, that if you allow it, or maybe sometimes it's uncontrollable, you'll actually cry. Or if someone smiles, you see a smile on someone's face. What does that mean to us? That something inside the person must be making them happy. I'm talking about authentic feelings and so on. So there you see how there's a body language that's just an expression of a feeling or an energy that is not visible to us. Because I could be happy and not show you that I'm happy. I could hide the fact I may not smile. Someone may be sad and not cry. So in other words, we have inside of us forces at work, and then they manifest themselves in this physical universe. So the Kabbalists and the mystics, the way they see all of existence is exactly the same way. Everything you see out there, from the trees to the woods to all, are really just outer layers of inner forces at work. So even though, I mentioned a volcano, as we know, is built up energies for a long time, have pent up, and then at some point it erupts. That doesn't mean when it doesn't erupt there's nothing going on. It just means we can't see it. It's beneath the surface. And even with all the science, sometimes you can't even predict. The point of all of this is to go back to the concept of what is existence, what is phenomenon, what is the phenomenon called nature, and what is the phenomenon called miracle. So the way the mystics would put it is the following. As when the surface remains more or less intact, we call that natural phenomenon. Why? Because it's predictable. Not because it's less miraculous, it's just predictable. As I'll soon discuss more at length what that means. When something happens beneath the surface, like erupts, and erupts to the surface level, it actually can change the course of nature. That's called a miracle. So the way a mystic would put it would be, it's simply energy that's being manipulated or maneuvered in a way that actually can have an impact on the physical existence in a different way. So there's the big phenomenon of the book called The Secret, Power of Attraction. It wasn't a secret for many people. I'm not getting into the marketing end of it. We'll just talk about it. It's become a big fad. But this concept is expression in Yiddish, Tag gut wird sein gut. Think good and it will be good. It was always known that people who have positive energy, who are optimistic, that optimism affects your immune system. Person, God forbid, lying in a hospital and has visitors and guests and has hope, there's no doubt that that's going to help them heal. Is it a guarantee? There are no guarantees, but it's definitely a big asset. Person lying in the hospital alone, no one coming to visit, with no hope, resignation, no question will weaken a person's immune system on a very physical level. So the psychosomatic effects, for instance. So the fact that our moods, our feelings, our attitudes have impact on existence, there's no question about it. Today, it's proven many different ways. We have to just take it with a grain of salt, because sometimes, let's say in this book, it doesn't mean you're going to dream about a jaguar, you're going to get a jaguar in your driveway. That's somewhat simplistic and that's already so-called a con job. But the general concept, in a respectful way, of an attitude having an effect on your life, absolutely. We often attract to ourselves what we project. You project negative energy, you think you're going to attract positive people? It doesn't go that way. Why would they want to be around you if you're always sour? You'll attract other sour people. And vice versa, in a vicious cycle. I mean, that's just on a very basic level, but that has implications, because your friends tend to affect you. Your mood is affecting what friends you choose, so it becomes like who's deciding what. It becomes one mess, and as the years roll on, this becomes a real deep hole you dig for yourself, very hard to get out of. So this is an impact on your real life. It's not just some type of mindset. That attitude can actually affect your whole life and your destiny. You may never meet the right person because of that. You may never find the right person to marry because of your own attitude. I don't mean to put blame on ourselves. It just means that our reactions, our feelings, our projections definitely impact the world around us. So in that context, we all would want to call that a miracle. I wouldn't call that a miracle. I call that it's a sophisticated way of understanding life. It's not purely superficial and what you see is what you get. It's not that way. That there's more complicated things. Our feelings, our energy, so to speak, our vibes, impact things. And when you really imagine someone has concentrated ability, a tzaddik, to manipulate the spiritual energies. I mean in a positive way manipulate. I mean like that you can come to a person like that who has such soulfulness, such warmth, such love, and they're so in touch and so transparent, their ego is not there. It's not that difficult to imagine that a person like that can in some way rewire you, so to speak. You don't need to have a measure of faith. You may need faith to find which is the right person. But if you think about it, it's not such a complicated thing to understand. Since we're all souls within bodies, most of us live so-called body-like lives, meaning we're more driven by our materialistic needs. Think of somebody who's driven by spiritual needs, and spirituality is what drives them. A person like that will have ultra-sensitivity to others, has that ability to be able to awaken your heart up and your soul. To use a simple example from the book of Song of Songs. So he says, Kamayim aponim leponim, kain lev ha'adam la'adam. As a face is reflected in water, so too one heart is reflected in another. Which means that a heart speaks to a heart. Words from the heart enter the heart. When you hear someone speaking sincerely to you, so it could be you're not in the mood, it could be that you're not listening, but if you are somewhat receptive, it's impossible to deny and impossible to ignore. When you hear someone insincere, or just speaking from their head, very easy for you to ignore because your heart is not going to respond. You're not going to react to that. So when you say someone speaks to the heart from their heart to you, are they performing a miracle as they wake up your heart? Not at all. They're accessing an inner part of your life that usually is not accessible, and as a result, it changes things. It changes things on the inner level, and then as a result, on the outer level. It's in a sense, think of it like rewiring. Rewiring. The way they like to put it, if you remember, there was this film, same idea, Power of Attraction. What the bleep do we know? Where it was like this type of semi-documentary, physics, psychology, and it was a phenomenon. And its theme again is for those that are familiar with the mystical, it's very common themes. But it again became a fad because people are not familiar with these ideas. So there again, attitude, all about attitude. And there they interview, or they bring this Japanese researcher. It's a book. It's called The Secrets of Water, I think, or the Secrets Water Carry, or something like that. Right. Where they actually demonstrated. I mean, this is going to sound to you miraculous, but this is demonstrated. There's the books that document this. Japanese researcher who put water crystals under a microscope, water under a microscope, and saw the water crystals, and when there was negative energy in the room, like angry people, rage, or other negative feelings, or jealousy, or others in the room, people, the water crystals literally became grotesque shaped. They changed shape without anyone touching the water. They were just there, in the room. And when there was good feelings, kind feelings, giving and loving, the water crystals shaped into this beautiful patterns. I didn't do the test. I just read about it. I'm not shocked at all when I heard about it. It's quite amazing if this is corroborated. It's quite amazing. But if you know physics, it's not that amazing, because physics states that an observer affects what you observe. There's no such thing as an objective world. 150 years ago, science thought a scientist sits like behind the glass and watches, observes. Today we know observation affects, because we're all connected. The subatomic particles in this wall and subatomic particles in my eyes and in my being are all connected. There's some link. So it's not a surprise that we can affect each other, all of it. Does that mean by looking at the wall you can suddenly make it crumble? Maybe some people have that power. But it's not, and obviously I want to qualify all this. There are plenty of con artists that use these principles and essentially fakers. So, but as they say, not just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean no one wants to get me. Just because there are con artists out there doesn't mean there isn't some truth to the principles. You just have to know that most people selling them, especially for high price, are usually not the real thing. As great Kabbalists would tell you, that those that know don't say, and those that say don't know. So anybody that would be able to look through that wall is not going to let you know or advertise it, and definitely not going to sell you anything. Because these are people, godly people, selfless people. They're not in it for the money, and so on. So I just wanted to qualify that. All this being said still doesn't mean you should go out there and start looking for one of these people who has opened up a shingle, and saying that they could manipulate these energies. There may be, I'm not denying the possibility, but I would say 99% of the people out there that are doing it are not the real thing. So that's just a small qualification. I don't want to get the wrong impression. But the concept is not at all strange, especially if you're familiar with quantum mechanics. And this, what would have been called a miracle maybe a few hundred years ago, today would not be called a miracle. The fact that you can store so much information, literally, on a thread of hair. You ask anyone 150 years ago, 100 years ago, they say impossible. It's impossible. It doesn't make any sense. How could a thread of hair, which is so minuscule, carry so much information? Why? Because when the naked eye sees the thread of hair, you can't imagine that it has anything inside of it more. It doesn't have the room. But today we know that room is not measured quite the same way. Space on a physical level, you don't need to have a lot, or size doesn't matter, to use the cliche, basically, because in minute, you can create the greatest nuclear explosion through fusion or fission on the most minuscule level. As we also know, God forbid, that one mutant cell in a body can wreak such havoc and destroy a life, even though there's 75 trillion cells in the human body, the human being. What's one? But just like a dot in a computer program. Doesn't matter how many lines, whether there's billions of lines of code. It doesn't really matter. A dot's a dot. We don't live in a world where we look at space and time quite the same way, because we know that it's all in quality. That you could have one thread of hair, and within it lies layers and layers and layers that are beyond imagination. Is it logical? Initially, the first time you hear it, it doesn't sound logical, but then you start realizing that we are the limited ones. Just because it looks small to us doesn't mean it's small. It just means we don't know how to measure things. We measure them with very limited vision, and we have limited tools. Like that fisherman story I always tell, where there was a guy, I was a physicist, I forgot who it was, Sir Arthur or something or other. And he was trying to explain these bizarre results of quantum mechanics in the 30s and 40s, and 20s and 30s in Berlin and universities in Europe, where they were being discovered by Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and these physicists. And Einstein, for the record, never really could accept the whole idea because it was too bizarre, it's too counterintuitive. So he gave an analogy of a fisherman. People said, how could you come with these bizarre conclusions when no one has ever seen a subatomic particle? And his analogy, beautiful analogy, was a fisherman who spread his net across all the seas and came up with different types of fish, different sizes and shapes and colors and species and this. And he documented it all. And his brilliant conclusion was the following. And he thought he would win a Nobel Prize, I'm sure. That there are no fish in the sea shorter than a half-inch long. You hear the brilliance? No fish in the sea shorter than a half-inch long, because not one fish of the millions that he documented were shorter than a half-inch. It seems like impeccable logic. But as the story with the child that says the emperor with no clothes, so one little kid said to him, 1 second, can I see the net you used? And they look at the net, and the net has spaces that are ½ inch wide and long between the ropes. So you can imagine, I should show it for the camera, spaces like this, okay, net. And obviously, therefore, all the fish that were shorter than ½ inch long fell back into the water. So all you have to do is add one line for it to be a true thesis, based on the net that I used, which had ½ inch spaces. With such a net, you can't capture fish that are shorter than ½ inch long. Now, you wouldn't need him to obviously do this. He wouldn't have to study all these fish to come to that conclusion. But this was the example he gave. It's a beautiful, brilliant example, because we often come to conclusions, and the conclusions are right, but they're based on faulty instruments, or limited instruments, maybe better put. And it's up to us. Like someone can say, I think that person is not a nice person. All you have to do is add one thing. I think, in my opinion, based on my subjective observation, that changes the whole picture. That you're subjective, you're not objective. That doesn't mean the person is not nice, is nice. It just means that it's important to have the humility when you make statements, and especially conclusive ones. A true intelligent person has to qualify and say, based on A, B, C, D, E, that's how I came to conclusion A, B, C, D, E. If you don't give the first half, your conclusions can be very, very weak, and also ultimately you won't be. How could they be trusted? And this is common. This is in the case in business analysis, in psychology, in anything, in self-analysis. It's always important. Someone says, "My life is not working. I can't find a shidduch. I can't find a soulmate. I did everything possible." Oh, that last statement, you did everything possible. In your opinion, you did everything possible, based on your tools and based on maybe the things you wanted to do. Maybe someone had told you something you didn't want to do, you couldn't even hear it. So it's not like you did everything possible. You did what you thought was possible. Again, my intention here is not to criticize anybody, but it's vital for any type of health is to first know that you're blind in some way. We're all blind in some ways. So to go back to the story of the miracle, the anatomy of a miracle, so therefore, if you think about it, and that there's spiritual energy within existence, that you could say maybe you can't prove, like you can't prove that there's subatomic energy, just like you can't prove there's love. Let someone prove scientifically that there's love. You can dismiss it all. You can turn it into a chemical that's necessary to get people to mate. So chemical, is that love? Well, we call that romantic feeling of love and nurturing and warmth. But nevertheless, I don't like to get into a scientific philosophical debate about it, because you're never going to win such a debate. If someone really doesn't want to accept that there's love in this world, they can easily scientifically dismiss it. The only answer I have is it's experiential. I feel there's love. Is that good? It's good enough for me, frankly. Most of us anyway don't really live our lives based on scientific conclusions. They're very good for things that don't affect you. Like when you get angry at somebody, you don't and first hook yourself up to all kinds of sensors and say, maybe I'm not angry. You get angry, you just feel angry, and that's it. You know? And most of our decisions are based on emotions, if you're really honest. If we're intelligent, we'll monitor the emotions. We won't let it control us. We won't let it completely control our lives. But decisions, especially on personal level, the feelings we have to our mothers and fathers, to people that are close to us, based on scientific analysis, that's ridiculous. We're subjective creatures that have minds, and minds are an important thing. They're like processors, a computer. But let's not deceive ourselves that we are basically driven by intellectual decisions when it comes to the most important things in life, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to any emotional arena. That's driven by the intellect. If you're healthy, you'll let your mind more or less not let your heart just take control and be completely impulsive, which can be destructive. But it's ultimately, decisions are not made necessarily on the mind level. I'm just saying that as an aside. So to go back to the issue of spiritual energy, yes, there is an element of sensing and feeling that there's more to life than what meets the surface, what meets the eye, which is on the surface level. And the mystics would say, when someone can touch that place, they can actually rewire things, and as a result, actual nature can actually change. Now, what does nature mean? Because if you're going to talk about miracle, let's talk about what nature is. So the Baal Shem Tov has an interesting way of putting it. He says the difference between a natural event and a miraculous event is one thing. He says it's frequency. That's the difference. If the sun were to rise once in our lifetime, everybody would call it a miracle. You'd come out with camera crews and family and watch this thing. But since it happens every morning, we get used to it. So basically, nature, as he puts it, is a bunch of miracles, a sequence of repeated miracles that happens so often that you take it for granted. Is it a miracle, for instance, that we're right now able to sit here without any assistance, breathe? Well, how many breaths will be taken during this class? The hundreds, the thousands of breaths that each person will take. Is that a miracle? So that most of us would say, no, there's billions of people doing it. What makes it a miracle? But who says that since so many people are doing it so often makes it less of a miracle? It just means that we're used to it. We take it for granted. Go into a hospital, God forbid, where a person has to struggle for every breath, and you suddenly wonder, so what's the difference between me and that person? What's working by me, what's not working, that's not working there? And if you really understand the anatomy of the respiratory system, you come to recognize that it's quite extraordinary that how many things have to work. All you need is one thing not to work, and there's trouble, God forbid. For all to work, it's more miraculous than not to work. It's just too many items. It's like so many pieces of the machine. Which is not surprising why then King David, in his last verse of the 150th Psalm, in the book of Psalms, he concludes and says, Kol neshama tahalel ka. That every soul, he says twice, neshama, every soul praises God. So what's the redundancy? What is the neshama? So the Medrash says, an interesting interpretation, that neshama can also be read neshima. In Hebrew, neshima is breath. Neshama is soul. Neshima is breath. Not an accident. In the Bible it says that God breathed into a soul, a divine soul, into the dirt, into the earth, and from that human being was created. So breath and soul are very much connected. Soul, breath. That's where you find many exercises and spiritual exercise. Breath is a very big thing. It's a force of life. Ruach. It's one of the names of the soul. Ruach. Wind, breath. The breath of life, as they say. So the Medrash says, Kol neshima tahal kan. Every breath we take, every breath, not one breath, but every neshima v'neshima, every breath and breath we take, we praise God because we recognize that it's a gift and it's a miracle to be alive, and it's a miracle to be able to breathe without any obstructions, God forbid, or without assistance. So long before they popularized the song, and every breath we take, this was King David's psalm, that every breath we take, we praise God. And it's not just the breath, it means every step we take, every move. But to do so, you have to be sensitive to the forces beneath the surface. Because on the surface level, breathing, so you're breathing, big thing, we all breathe. But look at the first time a child emerges in this earth, a newborn child. It's a miracle. Show me a pair of parents, no matter how scientific they are, that will tell you that they were not awestruck when their child was born. You can then later start analyzing and rationalizing and say every animal who gives birth, so what? So it doesn't make it less of a miracle. The fact that a life suddenly pops out of nowhere, 9 months, when it was once just a cell, and now we're all sitting here with all our complex lives, sitting in therapy and talking about everything that it's a pretty big miracle. However, as I said, miracles are not appreciated because it's frequent. So in this context, actually in Tanya, he says even a more interesting statement. He says Teva, nature, is the name we use for everything that we don't understand. We just call it, it's nature. It's natural. But if you think about it, why were you saying it? What do you mean it's natural? What do you mean it's not natural? Simply means that it's been done before. It's been around. Well, how does that explain things? Just because it's been around doesn't explain it. It's just like saying it was here before. What about the first time it was here? So it's like that story from the guy from Chelm. Chelm was one of these towns in Poland. They had a lot of fools there. Well, the truth is they said they had a lot of wise people. I just met actually a couple from Chelm. They're pretty smart. No, they are. They live in New Jersey. But their neighbors, I guess, were resentful, so they created this whole folklore called Stories of Chelm. So here's the guy from Chelm, this is like these very small, klein shtetl, how do you say in Yiddish, Kleinstädtlich in English you'd say small town, provincial-minded people. So they don't understand the big sophistication of the big city. So in Chelm was one of these old towns where they still moved around. There were no cars, there were no trains. There was a horse and a buggy, basically a horse and a carriage. One day, one of the guys from Chelm goes out and sees the big city, and he comes. He sees a steam engine for the first time, a locomotive, called a train. And he's amazed. He comes back and tells everybody, "I can't believe it. He saw a wagon with no horse, no one pulling it, and it moves." And so everyone said, "How does it move?" He says, "There's a wagon behind it that pushes it." And what pushes the second wagon? There's a third wagon. And it goes on, and the third wagon, the fifth wagon, and the 10th wagon. Who's pushing the 10th wagon? He forgot to ask. It's a technicality. You know? He didn't know what a steam engine was. He didn't understand that nothing's pushing it. It's being pulled. It's being generated. So it's easy to say, yeah, it's natural. Yeah, it's moving. It always has moved. We all breathe. This is called being sensitive to life, to the human condition. When someone comes to you, a friend, and says to you, they have a problem. So if you're jaded and cynical, you could say, yeah, we all have problems. People from the beginning of time have had the same problems. If you're a sensitive person, you listen. And you try to help. Look, if it's a person who's always complaining and they never do anything about it, so you can tell them, listen, you've said this 1,000 times, I can't help you anymore. But to just dismiss it and say because everybody has problems is not a sensitive thing. A sensitive human being does not dismiss things because it happened already once. Just like when you're in pain, and someone say, "What are you in pain? Yesterday you were in pain too. Why should it bother you?" Yeah, it doesn't bother you. It bothers me. You know, for me it matters. To you it doesn't matter because to you it's just another statistic. Human life, love, sensitivity, beauty, anything that really matters between us is about sensitivity to forces that we don't just take for granted. You know, why do you think marriages fail? 50% divorce. So all the pundits will tell you for a simple reason. It's monotony. At some point, it just gets monotonous. People with each other, and there's nothing that excites them. What's really happening? What's happening, the surface of life has taken over. And how long can you just be with someone? You both come home from work tired, and the same person, the same jokes, the same this, and so on and so forth. So it gets monotonous. The only secret to real dynamic relationship is dynamics. Is a dynamic force where two souls that connect. If you can connect to another human being, not on the body level alone, not on the surface level, but on a soul level, that's endless reservoirs of knowledge, of stimulation, of inspiration, of sexuality, of love, of romance. That's the key. But that requires work, and that requires effort, and that requires not being caught up in the routine of life. There's no doubt we live in a world which is highly accelerated, and interesting, the high acceleration of our life, which means you can access information quickly, you can process information quickly, anything is immediate, you can get fast food, everything. Highly accelerated. So on one hand, it's a gift. But on the other hand, it's a great curse. The curse of it is that it also accelerates the monotone. It also accelerates the boredom. You get quickly used to things. Because you can get it so easy, take it for granted. So I'm not suggesting, God forbid, that technology is a curse. It's neutral. It's how we use it. It's like they say, junk in, junk out. If you come in with a human side to yourself, technology can be a great asset. If you come in with a wrong attitude, the technology can be your undoing. You know, just check out people sitting at meetings with their Blackberries and Blueberries, the emails. It can drive you crazy. Besides the disrespectful thing, but now it's already common. 5 people at a meeting, everyone's doing it, so what's the problem? You know? I'm always, whenever I have refused to, not in any time, not some type of crusader, but I just can't handle it. It's like, to me, it's enough intrusion as it is with the computers, and it's not like I'm not technically savvy, you know, but it just, I find it to be, I mean, I understand it's available, it's like Mount Everest. Why do you climb? Why are you climbing it? Because it's there. Once we have the technology, now we need it. I understand. But it just, if you think about it, to pause, I don't know how much it helps our children when they need us, if you're checking your email while they're calling to you, and how much it helps in general love and relationships and all the things that matter. So technology is a great asset. Trust me, I use it, and I think it's an unbelievable tool to bring godliness and truth and love to people. But only when you understand it as a tool, nothing more, nothing less. It's just a very good tool. It's a fast tool. It's a powerful tool. And if it becomes an end in itself, it just what it does is it just feeds into that whole same back to the monotony. So I would tell you that those of us that allow your soul to speak to you, you will access miracles in your life. That's what it comes down to. Because this whole word miracle in nature, as I'm discussing here, is subjective somewhat. As you'll see in a moment, it's not completely subjective, but from our perspective, in some ways it is. Because basically the natural things happening in your life may be the greatest miracles, except you're not noticing it because it's so common, it's so available to you. It's in front of you. It could be the thing that you need most, this thing you take most for granted. Who is it? I think it was good old Oscar Wilde that said, we kill the things we love most. Sometimes the things that are most important to you are right in front of you. We can spend all kinds of money and resources to find a solution to a problem, and then you find out that your brother or sister or a relative could have told it to you for free. But it's just the way it is. We take for granted things that are close to us. And therefore, there are miracles all over the place. They just sometimes masquerade in the world of nature, meaning they just, as I said, frequency, so sequential miracles that are there all the time. And it's a question of discovering it, as the Baal Shem Tov said. At the same time, I have to add, there is actually a thing called an objective miracle. Because even if you are a person who is, if you are a person who, let's say, is in touch with that part of yourself, the inner part, there's still times where we do pray for a real miracle. What that means is, there's still times we want an opening, a door, a new beginning. So there are times you can access it within so-called the structure of your life, within the cycle, the natural cycle. But there are times where you have to, or you want to be able to access something deeper or stronger. And I think that when we come to this month of Nisan, which is a month, as I said, miracles of miracles, Nisan Nasa Behem, so you have the story of Exodus from Egypt, which was not just recognizing that every breath we take is a divine miracle. There was actually a true miracle that happened. What was the miracle? That the Jewish people, who were enslaved for 210 years by a superpower, there'd seem no way out. There was nothing that was going to bring down Egypt. And their arrogance. They had the money, they had the power, they had the control, they had the grain, which was the commodity of the times. And it says actually in one place that had the Jews stayed one day longer, they would never have been able to get out of Egypt. Not just physically, spiritually. Because they were already, at that point, they were so psychologically demoralized and so psychologically, you can say, contaminated by the Egyptian exile and the bondage and the oppression that they would have been completely broken. So it was like the last second, the last what's the word? What expression you use? The last possible moment they were redeemed, and the way the commentaries, 11th hour, the nick of time, and the way the commentaries explain it in a very beautiful psychological way, is that Mitzrayim, Egypt in Hebrew, means constraints. It means our limitations. We all live in a world, there are limitations. We have our constraints. We have physical constraints. We have inherent constraints. We need to eat and sleep. We age, health issues. None of us are immortal. So we have many constraints. Then we have, of course, psychological constraints. Our fears and inhibitions and insecurities and other forces that so-called crush our spirit. And then if you throw into the equation also our life experiences that break us. This can be our childhoods or our adult lives or whatever it is, disappointments, broken promises, dashed dreams. So there are many things. You can make a long list of Mitzrayims in our lives. We all have a good, nice list of things that in some way oppress or limit or inhibit us. And maybe it all comes down to some form of fear or insecurity. But I don't want to simplify it. You can fill in the blanks and translate it in your own life any way you see fit. This is essentially the central theme of the story of why Exodus from Egypt and Passover is so critical, because it's really about our lives. It's about our limits and our challenges. Then there comes a point in life where it could be your last chance, so to speak, where you're limited, you've been broken so many times, you just really give up. So the Exodus of Egypt, its story tells us that there is hope, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that God, as He did then, and as we say in the beginning of the Ten Commandments, which is why it's so vital, that means God can do it at any time, actually performs a miracle and opens up a door. Anochi Hashem Elokech, I am your God that lifted you out of your constraints. That there's another side inside of us, our soul, created in the divine image, that as inhibited and as constrained and limited the material part of our life is, this other voice, this other power, allows you to transcend. The word transcendence is the key word here, the operative word, which means you have a part of yourself that can transcend any limitation. So when someone comes to me or counseling for whatever issue it is, and they say to me, they tell me about how terrible their life is, how difficult. So yeah, there's one way that someone can just dismiss and say it's not so difficult as you think it is, or there are other people that have it more difficult, and they got through it. That's one approach. And I'm not saying that there's no legitimacy to that approach, but the approach I take, which I believe is the way the Torah describes it, is always, even if it's all true what you're saying, which it isn't always. Sometimes we exaggerate, sometimes we're more overwhelmed by it than actually, in other words, it could look worse than it is. But even if it is all true, the fundamental faith of the whole basis of Jewish belief is that for every difficulty we have in life, we're given an equal amount of strength to overcome it. It's the concept of Magdim Refuah L'Maka, that before the illness, the healing precedes the illness. Why is it, for example, in the medical world, there's such belief, to the point of irrational belief, that every disease can be conquered? I always ask this to the atheist doctors I know. I said, why are you spending so much money researching? How do you know you're going to ever conquer this disease? Every disease is conquerable, they tell me. I said, where do you get that arrogance from? Maybe this disease is just too powerful for us. And my point, of course, is to show them they have faith in miracles, basically. Or they have faith in the human spirit. You can call it whatever you like. Or they have faith in their science. But it is faith, because it may not make sense. Why can't you just say some diseases will kill us all? Or some diseases will never be healed. Maybe we can prolong life, or we can overcome the symptoms, but never really heal. But you see illnesses that were once considered to be incurable. And not only that, they killed millions of people. Today they don't exist. Whether it's smallpox or it's you're the doctor, you can give me the list. The 20th century, because there is something an unfathomable, what's the word I want to say? Incorrigible, an endless reservoir of belief in the human being that we can conquer every enemy, that we can conquer every challenge. Where that comes from, I will tell you, it comes from the divine spirit. Where atheists think it comes from, that's their problem. Let them figure it out. You know. So I see it as basically as two forces inside of us. One side of us says we are victims of nature. We're victims of circumstances. You're born a certain way, certain things, and that's it. But there's another part of us that can transcend. That's Yetziat Mitzrayim. That can free us from no matter what limitation we have. And that's the key thing. It's not to tell us that life is easy. It's not to tell you and dismiss your challenges and ignore them, or they're not so bad. As I said, sometimes maybe that helps. Maybe we should distract ourselves and just not dwell on the negative. But above all, it's to tell us that even if it's all that bad, there's an equal force of good that counters it. That's what's called having a soul. That's what's called having a soul. And in divine, if you don't, and created in the divine image, if you don't have that, then I don't see any hope. To me, that's bottom line where there's hope for all of us, no matter what situation you're in. And those that have healed and those that have grown, in some way or another, access that. Whether it's in the 12-step programs where they say that you have to surrender to a higher force, or it's through friends and support systems, or it's whatever words you use for it, it's not really relevant. The bottom line is some type of reservoir, some type of oasis of energy that comes from the spirit of the human being that can overcome challenges. So in a sense, the celebration of Passover is really the celebration of a miracle in that sense. So in addition to what I said earlier, that even in nature there's a form of sequential miracles, meaning as we breathe, or the sun rising, or anything that's happening, if you really look at it and you're sensitive to it, you don't just take for granted, that too is a form of a miracle. It's a form of an energy and hope. But even if one sees that, sometimes you still need something that's out of the ordinary, extraordinary. In other words, there's seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, and recognizing that the ordinary is never ordinary. And then there's actually objective extraordinary experiences that sometimes can lift us up to a place that is even beyond the miracle within nature. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, there is the miracle within the nature. That's the first step we should try to access. And then there's true objective experiences that really can lift you to another level. And that's where Passover comes in. So in a way, when he's saying nisim, nisim, miracles upon miracles, it's like saying there's two types of miracles. One is the miracle of recognizing and being sensitive to life, even as we see it, even in its conventional structure, that there's a program beneath the surface that can be maneuvered and things can change. And then there's actually a divine intervention, that if you allow yourself to access your soul, or you allow your soul to speak to you, it can lift you out of a predicament that didn't seem any way hopeful. So as we enter this month of Nisan, which is literally becoming this Shabbos, when is Rosh Chodesh Nisan? It's on Sunday. The Shabbos is called Parshas HaChodesh. We begin reading the chapter of how Moses was shown the moon, the new moon. You look at the moon and you look at the sun. The sun is sometimes compared to that first divine intervention I mentioned, the divine of nature. It's sheer consistency. It never changes. It has a certain power to it, reliability. And the moon is really the energy of miracles, because the moon is always changing, and it has its own mystique to it. And though it has light and it's just a reflection of the sun, but we know it's much more than a reflection of the sun. It has its own life, its own cycle. As I've often mentioned, that you see people in love, two people in love, you never see them staring at the sun, but at the moon you will see them staring. And it's not just because the sunlight is so powerful. It's because there's something about the moon that has its own unique power. For the Jewish people in particular, we say we count according to the cycle of the moon. Because the moon has the mystery of rebirth, the mystery of the waning, the waxing and waning of ups and downs. And just when you think it's about over, a new moon is born. And that's what Moses was shown in the midst of Egypt. God says, in the center of Egypt, the center of the depravity of Egypt, Moses is shown, as we'll read this Shabbos, that there is hope. That today, I tell you, just as this new moon is being born, God tells Moses, there will be a new life given to the people, and I will take them out of Egypt. And exactly 2 weeks to the day later, as it will be 2 weeks to the day, Passover comes, when the Jews were taken out of Etzem Hayem Hazeh, when they marched out of Egypt, after 210 years. You can imagine, they got used to it. It wasn't an easy thing. It was hard to even accept. Many of them didn't want to go. Many stayed, actually, because they couldn't accept, they couldn't even believe that it's possible. There are many that did hold on to the faith and the promise. And this, in a way, is a message for all of us on two levels. As I said, the two levels of the miracle. First of all, to look at your life in a new way. You may think your life is just a plain, mediocre, boring life. But the fact is, that's true maybe on the surface level, and it's true how you see it. And remember, as I said earlier, what we project, that's what happens. We, as they put it, the way the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. Think about that. So next time you're in that mode, write down for yourself a nice little poetic flourish. The way the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. So they're fired in a way that you look at your life as monotonous. Then basically you've written your script, and you're more or less going to live up to your own prophecy or prediction. Now you could say, and you can argue that, hey, you have proof because yesterday was that way, and 2 days ago, and 10 days ago, and 10 years ago. And the more things change, the more they stay the same. And then I'm sure you have friends that will definitely corroborate that approach, which is part of the whole thing. Your circle of friends are usually ones that really agree with the same philosophy. So all that may be true, but there's one little qualification that you have to add, like the guy with the fisherman with the net. It's true from your perspective. That's about it. The question is, how holy is your perspective? How should we worship your perspective? If you worship your own perspective, you may say that you're doomed to live up to what you expect of yourself. But if you open up a little door of humility and say, maybe my perspective isn't that holy after all, and not that absolute, maybe there's a different perspective and you allow it in, then you begin to access that maybe beneath the surface there's more going on in your life than you think. So when Thoreau writes that most people live a life of quiet desperation, it's the life they choose. And when you read that line, it makes you feel good. Some people feel good because everyone else is living that way too. So I'm not that bad. Well, that's nice on one end, as King Solomon writes in his own depressing moment. He writes, Der Helach v'der ba, a generation comes and a generation leaves. Ve'en kol HaChodesh tachas hashemesh. And there's nothing new under the sun. And nothing has changed. Very, how do you like that feeling? A generation comes and a generation goes and nothing has changed. And then he goes further and says, all the rivers flow to the sea and the sea doesn't get full. Basically dismissing any achievement and so on. But he does conclude Ecclesiastes with a upbeat note, and as some of the mystics will put it, that King Solomon wisely, in his wisdom, said nothing under the sun. He didn't say nothing is new. He said nothing under the sun is new. But above the sun is another story. So if you allow yourself to be a victim and live on an earthen level, grounded, with your head in the earth, then yes, you're going to be a victim of nothing new. But if you allow your spirit to rise and soar above the sun, there's much new there. It's like a flying bird. And that's the second side of, that's the second option we have. That instead of looking at our lives just based on the scripts of the old, to really allow in a fresh way of looking at it. And that fresh way can sometimes require finding a new friend, reading a new book, going to a new Seder table, not the same monotonous one that you went last year. Something new. You have to do something different. Like I coined my own little line based on a combination of different cliches I found. When they say in healing, they say if nothing changes, nothing changes. But things like this. When people say to me they want some change in their lives, I say, look, if you do what you did, and you say what you said, and you think what you thought, what do you think you're going to have? What you had. They like that. Impeccable logic, right? It's a scientific theory. It works actually. So we want to have something new, but our actions and our words and our thoughts all remain the same. So where exactly is this newness going to come from? So yeah, you can have this irrational faith that maybe God is going to just force something new into your life, even though you don't want to talk about it or think about it or act on it. But it's very hard to imagine because even God, in a way, has bound himself to our actions. If God wants to give you a gift, if I want to give you a gift, and I'm not equating myself, I'm just using an example. If I want to give you a gift, you get that? It's a wave. We're going to wave. Listen, you could always see this tomorrow in the archive, and you can wave back there. So if not now, later. Right. Right. So I want to offer you a gift, but you don't come to receive it, or I give it to you, but your pockets have holes in them, or you have no basket to contain them in. So the gift was given, but you are unable to contain it. So Barachacha Hashem Elokecha b'chol asher tasa. That blessings manifest in our actions and what we do. We have to make some hishtadlus, as they say, some effort. The effort becomes the container. No effort at all. So yes, can it still enter your life? There's a likelihood, but very, very remote. Because what are you going to do with it? Where are you going to go with it? So the concept is basically that the first step in recognizing miracles is recognizing there's a pattern to your life that's much more fascinating and exciting than you ever think. Sometimes you need another person to point it out to you. Now, of course, it's built on the belief and understanding that you are created in the divine image, and that you're here on a mission, and that you matter, that you're indispensable musical note with a unique contribution to make, that no one but you can make. Obviously, that's the key. When you have that sense, then your life takes on a whole different excitement. You wake up in the morning and you wonder, why was I put here? and then you can't see, even the things that you may appear from one perspective monotonous can end up being extremely unique. To you may be monotonous. You may find someone else who will appreciate it and can help you appreciate it. So that's the first thing, is to recognize the miracles within the nature, so to speak. But then there's something deeper. When you do that, what happens is, then true openings can happen even beyond your efforts, even beyond your recognition, not just in your patterns. That a true opening can truly, truly happen, meaning a true miracle. True miracle simply means that a new level of energy, a new wiring, something rewiring that actually takes place. So it's not just recognizing the wiring that exists, actually a new rewiring. Sometimes they say the difference between these two is the difference between a blessing and a prayer. Let's say you go to a tzaddik for a blessing. So he gives you a blessing. What's the difference if he gives you a blessing, a bracha? Or in Hebrew, he was mispal for you, a prayer. He prays for you. Or you pray for yourself. We see there's two words in Hebrew, bracha and tefillah. The difference is, a blessing can reveal what you have in your destiny and open up the channels and get rid of impediments that you should get what you really deserve. But just waiting for you, there may be some blockages. So the blessing of a tzaddik or the blessing of someone that is a holy person can help unblock the passages, so that which really is part of your so-called destiny should become a reality. But tefillah, on the other hand, is much deeper. When you pray, you can actually change the course of someone's destiny. So for instance, if God forbid somebody's sick, or somebody has a situation that seems to be very troublesome, so yeah, their destiny may be that that person should die. A prayer, on the other hand, can actually rewire reality. When you pray, you say to God, Yehi Ratzon, may you be your will, may you change the course of destiny, if necessary. Now obviously we would like to have that the destiny should be good, but sometimes we do need a miracle in that sense. Sometimes we do need a new opening, so to speak. When the Jews left Egypt, there was both elements. There was important for them to recognize the divine hand in their lives, but also to recognize that there's a force sometimes that's beyond us. That when you do your part, something new can actually change. And it's both elements are critical to understand, and one does not need pure faith alone to appreciate it. It's understanding that life is not on a surface level, going back to my initial point, that life exists on an inner level. And when we access that inner, it becomes part of our reality, our outer reality. If you don't access it, it remains like a hidden force. Think of it like potential energy inside of you that you just you're not aware of, or you don't ever access. So of course it's not going to become part of your tangible reality. But if someone can show you you have this potential, and then teach you the tools to access it, it was always there. So our soul has that power. Sometimes we need others to help us access it. So as we enter this month of Nisan, I want to say to everybody that God should bless us all with the wisdom and the strength to recognize that every breath you take is a miracle. Sometimes it helps when you help others recognize it, then you recognize it yourself better. I could say that for myself. When I share it and I teach about it, obviously it makes me more aware. So it's a backdoor way to get yourself inspired. It's like the two guys that were traveling in the woods in the cold night, and it was so cold that they were both freezing. One was a thin guy, didn't have any blubber to keep him warm, so he passed out, of course, first. The other one lasted a little longer, but in his tribute, he didn't just abandon the first one. He went down and he saw it when he fainted. He began to massage his muscles and get his blood running, to keep him alive. As the night wore on, it got colder and colder. Well, he began to freeze as well, and he almost passed out. Right before he passed out, someone miraculously came by and saved them both, and they brought them to a fire, and they warmed, and they revived. So afterwards, the thin guy tells the heavier set guy, "Thank you so much for saving my life. Had you not exerted yourself to keep me warm to some extent, I would have perhaps died." And the heavier set one said to him, "No, I thank you, because had I not exerted myself, I would have passed out too." In other words, by exerting himself to warm another, he had to warm himself. It warmed him. This is the secret of education, They say that most therapists go into therapy because they need therapy, and that's the best therapy for them. You know, that either yes or no. I don't want to insult any therapist in that way, but some will say it's true because it's a way of identifying with another. But the fact is, if you want to keep yourself alive, one of the ways is to help other people be alive, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't always have to come in direct fashion. You want to, I always suggest this to people about Passover or Shabbos for that matter, or any Jewish tradition. You want your children and yourself not to become bored by tradition and ritual. Bring people to the table that don't believe in the whole thing, or are secular, or are strange to it, and you'll see, you'll have to explain it to them. And then it'll bring the best out of you. That's how it is. That's how you keep it alive. Unfortunately, many homes, traditional homes, the Seder or the Shabbat, it's the same thing. They light the candles, and the same arguments, the same songs, the same food. Everyone falls asleep at the same time at the table. I've been around, I know, I've been at tables like that. And the key to change that is to bring people to the table that are not conventional. As I said, you want no monotony in your life, so bring something new into your life. You're not going to do the same thing and get different results. So you bring someone new to the table, exciting people, different types. They don't have to be necessarily agreeable with you, and you'll see it comes alive. It doesn't really matter whether everybody agrees or not. The point is that it's a real experience. It's alive. It's always good to do that. It's always good to hear other opinions, and just in general, it opens up opportunities, horizons when you have more than one opinion, or people just the amen corner, just repeating confirming your way of looking at things. And I want to conclude with one final story, and we will have a little shorter class because I have another engagement I have to go to be explained by others if you like. That's why I'm a little dressed up here. Yeah, but
you look the same to me.
Well, you're lucky I did it this way. I could have stayed there and did a webcast, and you'd have to see me on screen. So think of it that way. So I want to tell this final story about miracles. There was these 3 Hasidim who were sitting around comparing notes about their miracles. So one Chassid said to he said about his great teacher, Rebbe. He said, my Rebbe, my child was very sick. Doctors gave up hope, and he gave a blessing, and the child was miraculously healed. Then the next one says, well, my Rebbe, I was a very poor man, and no money, and I took a few dollars, I took a loan, and my Rebbe suggested where I should invest it, and I turned into a major millionaire as a result, major success. So another miracle, great. And then the third one, whose name happened to be, I know his name was Shmuel Gerari, who was a very wealthy man, a very big chassid, and he said, my miracle goes like this. I was very wealthy, and so I would suggest us to invest somewhere. My Rebbe told me to invest elsewhere, and I lost all my money. Okay, so everyone says, so what's the miracle? He says, the miracle is that I remained a chassid. He remained loyal to his Rebbe. So think about it. Miracles have many different shapes and forms, and sometimes it's not about whether you get what you want, it's sometimes about commitment to truth. So that's just another version of the miracle story. And finally, the Baal Shem Tov said once, there was a child sick, and a mother who was a widow came begging to him to do something. So he gathered together 10 tzaddikim, hidden tzaddikim, the hidden tzaddiks. And they all prayed to no avail. So then he finally decided, he goes out to the forest, to the edge of the woods, and he knew where to find the so-called, the darker elements, the thieves, basically, where they would hang out. And they always liked the Baal Shem Tov, they always protected him. They said, what can we do for you? What are you doing here? He says, I need you. I need a minion. I need 10 thieves. Okay, so they collected 10 thieves, a minion. They took him to the synagogue. He said a few psalms with them, the prayers, to pray for this little girl to survive. And lo and behold, what happens? Yes, she miraculously recovers. So afterwards, his students said to him, I don't understand. We don't understand. Those tzaddikim, those hidden tzaddikim, such great people, couldn't accomplish it. Oh, yeah, do you needed thieves? She said, yes. Because I saw that the gates in heaven were all locked, and I needed someone to break in. So, You may, if you don't know if you want the moral of the story, the lesson, we all are thieves in our own way. We're all not that always perfect, and sometimes it's your so-called imperfections. If you use them for the right thing, you can open up new gates in heaven. So may God bless us all to use our wisdom, as I said, and fortitude, and find the right friends and bring in fresh air to allow us to see the inner forces that are there, right there. They're just waiting for you to open your eyes. And then new doors, real new doors can open as well. That everyone should be blessed as we go into this month of Nisan with health and parnasa, livelihood, and above all finding love, soulmate, building homes and families, and with healthy children, and in a way that perpetuates generations. Everyone have a very good night. And I say a bit good night as well to the web audience. A wave. Another wave, yes. And I will look forward to one announcement. One announcement is that next week's class will not be here. Will be a pre-Passover workshop at the JCC in Upper West Side, which is at 76th? Yes. 76th and Amsterdam. And it's earlier. It's 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. It's a 2-hour workshop. Yes. Don't make faces. So it's going to be a pretty hands-on workshop, a pre-Passover workshop. That's the hour. What can I tell you? It will be recorded. There will be hopefully webcast as well, right? Well, yeah, we'll say so. Why not? And I look forward to see you there. I would suggest you register early there. There will be also a meal. It's a light meal beforehand, like at 7. Re-register because the likelihood is it will be sold out. So I'm letting you know that. And I think it's for a nominal fee. It's not like an expensive thing. It's
$115. You can register the website.
right, there you go. So, and jccmanhattan.org. Okay, right. Okay, so everyone a great night, and I shall see you next Wednesday night. And meanwhile, have a great week.